You are a Roman soldier. You are the tip of the spear, a cog in the deadliest war machine the world has ever known. You faced Gallic hordes and Carthaginian elephants. Fear is a luxury you cannot afford. But here, before the walls of Syracuse, you are terrified. Not of the men on the walls, you can't even see them. You are terrified of geometry. You scream at the sight of a shadow. You tremble when a rope is lowered from the parapet because one old man, a 75-year-old mathematician, has turned this city into a living nightmare. He has weaponized physics, and in doing so, he has broken the mind of the Roman army.
To understand the sheer insanity of this siege, you first have to understand Marcus Claudius Marcellus. They called him the Sword of Rome. A hardened veteran of multiple wars, a man who had killed a Gallic king in single combat. He was Rome's answer to any problem. When a city defied the Republic, you sent Marcellus. He was direct, brutal, and accustomed to quick, decisive victory. He arrived at Syracuse in 214 BC with a massive force, legions of infantry, a powerful fleet of quinqueremes, and the best military engineers in the world. For him, this was just another conquest, a rich Greek city ripe for the picking that had foolishly switched its allegiance to Rome's mortal enemy, Carthage. The plan was simple, a simultaneous assault from land and sea. The city would fall in days. It was a foregone conclusion.
But Syracuse had a secret weapon. Not a new type of sword or a stronger wall. Their weapon was a mind. Archimedes. He was already a legend, famous for his work in mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. But he was an academic, a thinker, not a warrior. He was the cousin of the city's former king, Hiero II, and had spent decades creating wondrous inventions for him in times of peace. Now, with his city threatened, this elderly scholar was asked to turn his genius towards war. Marcellus saw a city. Archimedes saw a physics problem. He saw angles, levers, trajectories, and focal points. The Romans were about to learn, in the most brutal way possible, that a mind can be a far more terrifying weapon than a sword. The attack began at dawn. 60 Roman warships, bristling with soldiers, moved in perfect formation towards the seaward walls. On land, the legions advanced with their siege towers. The air was thick with anticipation. The Romans expected a shower of arrows, the typical defense. Instead, there was silence. The walls were quiet. The ships drew closer, 100 yards, 75. The legionaries gripped their shields, waiting for the inevitable clash. But nothing happened. Marcellus, watching from his command ship, must have felt a surge of arrogance. Perhaps the city's spirit was already broken. They were closer now, so close they could see the texture of the stone. And then, all hell broke loose. It wasn't a volley of arrows. It was a storm of stone and steel. From all along the walls, Archimedes' re-engineered artillery opened up. These were not standard catapults. They were meticulously calibrated engines of destruction. Huge ballistae, firing iron darts the length of a man, swept the decks of the ships. Catapults, designed for range and power, hurled half-ton boulders that didn't just damage the ships, they obliterated them. The Roman soldiers, packed tightly together, had nowhere to run. The psychological shock was immense. This wasn't a battle, it was an execution. They were being destroyed by an enemy they could not see, with a ferocity they had never encountered. The Romans were disciplined. Their commanders adapted. The big artillery was devastating at a distance, so the order was given, get to the base of the walls, get underneath the firing arc. It was a sound tactic, one that had worked 100 times before. But Archimedes had anticipated this. As the legionaries charged forward, a new kind of hell was unleashed. Smaller, rapid-fire machines, which the historian Polybius called scorpions, began firing through a dense network of loopholes at the base of the walls. These were anti-personnel weapons of terrifying efficiency. They fired smaller bolts, but with such speed and accuracy that they shredded the Roman formations. There was no safe distance. Far away, you were crushed by boulders. Up close, you were impaled by a storm of bolts. The ground became a kill zone. Marcellus was furious, but not defeated. He had an ace up his sleeve for the naval assault, a secret weapon called the sambuca. It was an engineering marvel. 2 massive warships were lashed together, and a giant protected siege ladder, over 100 feet tall, was mounted on top. The plan was to bring this monstrosity right up to the seawall, drop the ladder, and pour elite troops directly onto the battlements. It was the key to the entire assault. Slowly, protected by archers and other ships, the sambuca was maneuvered into position. It was a symbol of Roman power, ingenuity, and brute force. As it neared the wall, the defenders seemed to have no answer. The ladder began to lower. Victory was within reach. And then the Syracusans revealed their own monster. From over the top of the wall, a machine of terrifying scale appeared. It wasn't a catapult, it was a crane. A series of massive counterweighted beams that swung out over the water, with a giant iron grappling hook hanging from a chain. This was the Claw of Archimedes. Before the Romans could even process what they were seeing, the claw swung down and latched onto the prow of an attacking ship. The soldiers on board stared up in disbelief. Then the machine began to work. With a groan of strained timbers, the machine on the wall began to lift. Not just the hook, but the entire front of the Roman warship. The 50-ton vessel was hoisted into the air, its stern still in the water, hanging almost vertically. Men screamed as they lost their footing, sliding down the deck and plunging into the sea. Weapons, shields, and supplies crashed into the water below. The remaining crew clung on for dear life, suspended between the sky and the sea at the mercy of this wooden monster. And then, with calculated cruelty, the operator on the wall would release the claw. The ship would drop, smashing against the rocks or plunging beneath the waves. Sometimes the claw would swing the captured ship like a club, smashing it into the rest of the Roman fleet. It was chaos, it was terror, it was physics as psychological warfare. Marcellus could only watch in horror. His grand assault was a catastrophic failure. His ships were being plucked from the sea like toys. His legions were being cut down without even seeing the enemy. He had brought the full might of Rome to Syracuse, and he was being humiliated by one man's intellect. The historian Plutarch records his reaction. He turned to his own engineers, mocked their useless engines, and said, "Shall we not cease fighting against this geometrical Briareus?" Briareus was a monster from Greek mythology with 100 hands. Marcellus was admitting he wasn't fighting an army, he was fighting a god of geometry. He ordered a full retreat. The first assault was over. Syracuse and Archimedes had won. The Roman army was physically beaten, but more importantly, it was psychologically broken. A profound and superstitious terror infected the ranks. These were men who understood swords and shields. They did not understand this. They didn't understand how an enemy they couldn't see could kill them from half a mile away. They didn't understand how a wooden arm could reach out from a wall and smash a warship. According to Plutarch, the fear became so extreme that if any soldier saw so much as a piece of rope or a small beam of wood appear on the walls, they would break and run, screaming that Archimedes was about to unleash another engine upon them. The greatest army on earth had been reduced to a state of childlike terror. The siege had just begun, but the war for their minds was already lost. With the direct assault a failure, Marcellus blockaded the city. And it's during this long stalemate that the most famous and controversial of Archimedes' weapons is said to have been used, the death ray. The story goes that Archimedes constructed a massive mirror or an array of polished shields to focus the sun's rays onto the Roman ships. This concentrated beam of light would heat the wooden hulls to their combustion point, setting them ablaze from a distance. For centuries, historians and scientists have debated whether this was even possible. Could ancient technology achieve such a feat? The physics is sound. A parabolic reflector can indeed concentrate sunlight to create intense heat. The question is one of scale and materials.
Modern experiments have yielded mixed results. It's incredibly difficult to keep the focal point on a moving, bobbing ship for long enough to start a fire. The weather would have to be perfect, a clear, sunny day, and the Romans could have simply doused any small fires that started. So was it real? Maybe not in the spectacular way legends describe, but perhaps it wasn't meant to sink ships, but to terrorize sailors. Imagine being on a ship and seeing an intensely bright, blinding light on your vessel. Then a wisp of smoke appears on the sail. Even if it didn't burn the ship down, the psychological impact would be enormous. Real or not, the legend of the burning mirror became another tool in Archimedes' arsenal of fear.
The war of machines was over. Now, a more ancient and patient enemy took over: starvation. Marcellus, unable to take the city by force, resolved to wait them out. He surrounded Syracuse by land and sea, cutting off all supplies. This was the brutal, grinding reality of ancient warfare. For months it was a stalemate. The Romans dared not approach the walls, and the Syracusans could not break the blockade. Inside the city, the mood would have shifted from jubilant defiance to quiet desperation. Food would become scarce. Tensions would rise. Archimedes' machines could protect them from the Roman army, but they couldn't create grain out of thin air. Archimedes had built a perfect defense. He had accounted for every angle of attack, every Roman strategy. But there was one variable he could not control: human nature. After months of being cooped up, the people of Syracuse were desperate for a return to normalcy. A major religious festival in honor of the goddess Artemis was approaching. The city's leaders decided to hold the festival to boost morale. For one night, they would forget the war at their gates. They feasted and drank wine that had been distributed in celebration. They believed the Romans were beaten, that they would never dare attack the walls again. And on the walls, the sentries, caught up in the revelry, let their guard down. It was the single fatal mistake they had been avoiding for over a year. Marcellus was a patient and cunning commander. He had spies and sympathizers within the city, and he learned of the festival. He also learned, through careful observation, of a specific section of the wall that was less heavily guarded. During the height of the drunken festivities, a small hand-picked group of Roman soldiers approached the wall with ladders. They moved in absolute silence. The sounds of celebration from within the city covered any noise they made. They reached the top of the wall and found the sentries either drunk or asleep. They were quickly and quietly dispatched. The infiltration had begun. The small Roman contingent moved like ghosts through the city, making their way towards the Hexapolon Gate. They overwhelmed the few guards stationed there and threw the gates open. Outside, the bulk of the Roman army was waiting. The trap had been sprung. The roar of thousands of Roman soldiers charging into the city finally alerted the sleeping, drunken populace, but it was too late. Panic and chaos erupted. The perfect defense had been bypassed, not by a siege engine, but by a handful of men and a lapse in discipline.
What followed was the brutal sack of one of the richest and most beautiful cities in the ancient world. Marcellus had intended to preserve the city's treasures, but he could not control his men. After a long and humiliating siege, they were hungry for plunder and revenge. They swarmed through the streets, looting homes, desecrating temples, and cutting down anyone who stood in their way. Centuries of art, culture, and knowledge were destroyed in a matter of hours. The city that had been protected by the greatest mind of the age was now being torn apart by the basest of human instincts.
Amidst this carnage, Marcellus had given one specific order: find Archimedes and bring him to me unharmed. He held the genius who had tormented him in the highest esteem. A Roman soldier, busy looting, burst into a house and found an old man, oblivious to the chaos, hunched over a complex diagram he had drawn in the sand. The soldier, likely wanting the valuable astronomical instruments in the room, ordered the old man to get up and follow him to see Marcellus. Archimedes, lost in his world of pure thought, waved him away, annoyed at the interruption. His final immortal words were, "Do not disturb my circles." The soldier, who had no idea he was speaking to the man who had held the entire Roman army at bay, was enraged by this apparent disrespect. He drew his sword and killed the 75-year-old Archimedes on the spot. And so the greatest mind of the ancient world was extinguished, not in a grand battle of intellect, but in a moment of stupid, brutal ignorance. The man who weaponized the heavens was killed over a drawing in the dirt.
When Marcellus was told of Archimedes' death, he was reportedly devastated. He had been denied the chance to meet the mind that had so thoroughly outthought him. He cursed the soldier who had killed him and treated the death as a personal tragedy. He sought out Archimedes' surviving relatives and treated them with honor. He gave the great inventor a magnificent burial, and, respecting Archimedes' own wishes, had his tombstone engraved with the image of a sphere inscribed within a cylinder, a representation of his favorite mathematical discovery. The conqueror of Syracuse mourned the death of his greatest enemy.
The Siege of Syracuse stands as a unique moment in military history. For a brief, terrifying period, the rules of war were rewritten. Brute force, numbers, and discipline were rendered useless against the application of pure science. Archimedes proved that one person, armed with a deep understanding of the laws of nature, could defy an empire. His machines were eventually overcome, not by superior technology, but by human failing. Yet his legacy is not one of failure. It is a timeless testament to the power of the human intellect. He showed the world that the greatest weapon is not forged from steel, but from thought.
The story of Archimedes is a reminder that history is shaped not just by kings and generals, but by the thinkers, the inventors, the madmen who dared to see the world differently. His defense of Syracuse was a violent, beautiful, and ultimately tragic symphony of physics. But the debate still rages on about his most fantastic weapon, the death ray. A brilliant piece of propaganda or a functioning piece of ancient high technology? What do you think? Was the burning mirror real? Let us know your theory in the comments below.